It's James with NetNewsLedger. We're talking with Sol Mamakwa, who is the New Democrat provincial critic for Indigenous issues. Sol, welcome back to NetNewsLedger.
It's good to be back, James. Good to be back. How are you?
Well, I'm waiting, as I think all of us are, for COVID to be a distant memory in our rearview mirror of our lives.
I know with the numbers going down across the country and also the province, it's certainly the light at the end of the tunnel, but also we are also reminded, what's happening in Saskatchewan, with the rates of the crisis that's happening there now. That's so important to acknowledge that as well.
We just got a piece from the Canadian Rangers, from Sergeant Peter Moon, how hard the Canadian Rangers are working in Saskatchewan and in other northern communities. They've proven to be a godsend. Yes,
certainly. I got a quick briefing yesterday from the federal side, because I was just checking up on how things were over there and make sure that the resources needed for the community, that they're provided the resources. And I think the way I understood it is they acted too late, and I think that's sometimes when communities, First Nation leaders call for support, sometimes the governments just react too late.
That's sort of part of it. And yet yesterday, Ontario had a press conference with Minister Greg Rickford, the Minister of Indigenous Services, and Premier Ford in Kenora, and the province has committed $10 million towards the residential school children, finding if there's bodies here in Ontario at residential schools, and then working with communities and leadership to do what the people want to do, to repatriate those bodies up to home communities, for example. What's your take on that announcement and what the province is doing? Because they're leading the federal government on this right now.
Well, certainly I think it's important that, it's a good gesture to, come out and say that you're putting in these resources of, $10 million over 3 years. And, that's $3.3 million per year. And so I think it's, certainly important that we do that. And I know I'm not sure where that 10 million came from. I'm not sure if it's just because, that's the amount that got approved. But, how do you come up with a cost that had no consultation? And, what's the work they're going to do? When we talk about, because I've been talking to some of, First Nation Indigenous experts, when we talk about, pathologists, forensic pathologists, and also archaeologists that are First Nations that want to help. And I think, again, 10 million over 3 years is very minimal. It's a drop in a bucket, but it makes them look like as if they're doing something, and which is, it looks good on them. And I think, yesterday during the announcement, I was actually sitting right here, and I was on a Zoom call with the Indigenous experts, and I wasn't able to listen to the announcement, and I had and then that's during the announcement is when the briefing happened. An email came through inviting me from his office to do the briefing. They're going to brief me on the work, and I said, you know what, and I didn't see it until later on in the afternoon, and obviously that's why you've seen that tweet from last night. It's just it's just a total lack of respect on part of them. And it's just not right when they just want to, be the ones doing that. And, the work that we're doing when we talk about looking for our lost, children, our lost ancestors, it should be a nonpartisan issue. And, as a First Nation parliamentarian here in the province of Ontario, they didn't have the courage or the courtesy to even come and talk to me when they said they would brief me before the announcement. So it's that's just they'd rather get the political points rather trying to make change for and finding our ancestors, finding our children in these places, and they continue to do that.
I think what we're seeing from Kamloops is the tip of the iceberg. We're already finding out there's Brandon and other residential schools, and what we are finding out, and I remember being at the powwow at Lakehead University years ago, and the Truth and Reconciliation had a room set up to do interviews. And I know that people have been talking about this issue for a long time. And I think on the federal side, on the TRC recommendations, we're up to number 9 in completions. Things move at the speed of a glacier, and it's so hard on people. For our readers and viewers, who may not understand, and what does the residential school era, which only ended like not very long ago, really, in historical terms, what does that mean to you, and what should that mean to all of us in Ontario and in Canada?
I think residential school is the real history of Canada on how this country was built on. It's built on oppression. It was built on colonialism. It was based on racism. Those 3 things are the fundamental things, that was the intention of Indian residential schools. And I think we see it today in different forms when we talk about intergenerational trauma. When we talk about, the impacts of residential school, when we talk about colonialism and oppression, we continue to see it in different programs. When we talk about the overrepresentation of, children and youth in the child welfare system, when we continue to see overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the correctional system, when we continue to see children leaving the North, flying communities that do not have high school, leaving the community. It's all part of that. We're not, the 94 calls to action from the TRC. If governments had, the political will, they would have invested resources in those. And I think what we've seen here with the 215 and the other, the areas, other residential schools that are providing numbers, it's going to come in, it's going to increase, it's going to repeat. And as we have to be ready as First Nations, we have to be ready as, Ontarians, as Canadians to, that is something that's rolling, that's coming out. And I think, we cannot continue to allow governments say that they're putting in resources for these programs and services, because programs and services come and go. Governments come and go, federally, provincially, no matter what. And sometimes when they provide resources for incremental change, they actually perpetuate colonialism. They perpetuate, the oppression. They perpetuate the crisis in our communities. They perpetuate the racism, without talking about the fundamental changes that we need in our communities. We're talking about self-determination, when we talk about self-governance, when we talk about land claims, when you talk about treaties. Those aren't being discussed. And I think sometimes, we as First Nations fall into those places where we, work with the governments on programs and services, but that's not change. Incremental change is not change. And
I think just looking at the background in your office in Queen's Park, you have signs up on water is life and the importance of water. And those are from Neskantaga, where the problems with the water treatment plant continue to this day.
I got these from the children in Neskantaga back in November 2020, and I have a whole bunch of them here in my office, and that's what I mean by why is Neskantaga on its 27th year of boil water advisory? Why is it in Kiwetnunk, the riding of Kiwetnunk has 16 boil water advisories currently, 14 short-term, 14 long-term, which is over a year, and 2 short-term, which is less than a year. That's what's happening now. It's a different Ontario. It's a different Canada, and people don't understand that. And I think and that's, again, it's based on political will, and they use a jurisdictional game of ping pong to not do anything. Complacency of governments is not acceptable anymore in this day and age. And when we talk about water as a basic human right, then it's just not right. And these are the, as a member of provincial parliament, and that's what I try and bring out and make sure, like, there should, like, access to clean water shouldn't be a discussion. It shouldn't be a debate on it, and it's undebatable.
It's shocking to me, trips that I've made into the north and been into some absolutely amazing brand new schools, and the water fountain is boxed off. And it's not just the far north, Lac Seul. When I was in Lac Seul, the same thing, the community center, and there's the water fountain blocked off because the water wasn't safe to drink. And I don't think the average person, perhaps in Toronto or, Kingston or London, Ontario, can really understand the idea that for 27 years, like in Nescandiga, you can't have a glass of water from the tap. And it goes on because when youth come out to Thunder Bay, for example, to go to high school, they've been trained their whole lives, don't drink water from the tap. And it makes, health issues an issue because bottled water is almost the same price as a can of pop. So you end up with, more sugar in the diet, which leads to health problems. It doesn't stop. And it all starts with water.
Yes, and I think what you're describing there, that's what colonialism looks like. That's what oppression looks like. That's what racism looks like. And governments continue to treat, and there's people like that. And I think, we should not be afraid to speak up against governments on that, because what do we say when the province or the feds, when we actually get we get funding from these the province or the feds, and sometimes we are afraid to say things to them because they may take away the resources, they may take away the funding, the programs that we have, the projects in our communities. How do we deal with that? And would we rather see our funding, or do we keep do we fight for access to clean drinking water for our children and our grandchildren? So that's the the fundamental thing that we need to be able to come to terms with. And I think when we live it on a daily basis, like, say, access to no drinking water or clean drinking water, we normalize it. We normalize things, and we accept it that that's just the way things are. And communities come into that state, and sometimes when I see it when I travel in the communities, and people just it's been like that for 18 years. It's been like that for 15 years or whatnot. And
it's the way it is. It becomes the way it is. That's where the issue, I mean, when the discovery from Kamloops came out of 215 bodies, and the Kamloops, the church, I guess, in Kamloops is still fighting the release of all the records. And you look at that, and I remember growing up in the 60s and early 70s, and Canadians had this inherent thinking that we are not racist, and they would point their fingers at the Americans. They're racist. Look what they do. And as we go along in Canada and we watch the issues with with the Indian residential school, to steal the culture and language and everything from people, and then we go and we say, oh, okay, well, maybe it's just there. And then you find out, there's people attacking on every level. It should be sending a message to all Canadians that our international reputation, our national reputation, and who we really are isn't quite who we really think we are.
Yes, certainly. I think there's certainly a lot of responsibility on accessing the information that we need to access, whether it's from you know the churches, Catholic churches, but also hospital records. And there's so much information that we have to gather as well. There's certainly information that has been gathered already through the Truth and Reconciliation report. And I think I'm talking about the archival documents, and I'm talking about the research and the interviews that that are there already. And I think even like what about like say in Ontario, the death certificates. Like there must be a record of the people that die in Ontario, and then that's part of the work that we need to do. Like say, for example, in the search of our children, our ancestors, as we start in the coming weeks, in the coming months, in the coming years, and that's so important. Like, what about the police records, OPP records?
Yes.
Like those are some of the information that we need, and then are they open to releasing that information? And it's so, what about the testing that has been done on First Nations over the years? Which universities are willing to, which universities do have that information where they tested on First Nations people for, there's so much information we need.
It doesn't stop. And Saul, I mean, the key here, I think, is to keep the conversation going and keep the story in the media, because, as you know, we have a very short media cycle. The Kamloops story was top of the mark on the media for several days, and then it was replaced by the next leading story, and then the next leading story. And, the approach starts to become one of just get over it. That you hear from so many people. What would you say to someone who tells you as an Indigenous leader to just get over the past?
James, that's a very good question. And certainly people cannot get over it. What if we said, like, get over yours? What are some of the things that are very important to non-Indigenous people? Like we cannot get over it. Like this is the real history. And I think, like it's so important that, that we educate people of the real history of Canada, the real history of on how, this country was built upon oppression, colonialism, racism. And I mean, like this government that the provincial government that is sitting right now, when they came into power back in summer of 2018, one of the first things that they did was to cancel the Indigenous curriculum writing for high schools and for elementary. And we wasted 3 years already within that work. And that erases, like that means, the kids coming up that could have been in, like in grade 1, up to grade 12, could have learned the history, because that's what, like, it took us decades, it took us generations, it took us hundreds of years to get to where we are, the way we're treated as First Nations. And it's going to take us generations to get out of it. And it's going to take, we got to start somewhere to make change. And the change is within the children, within the youth, because they'll learn about the real history of Canada. And I think that's so important. And, we cannot get over it. We have to share these truth-telling stories on the treatment of Indigenous people. And I think, unfortunately, the 215 is a truth-telling moment. And unfortunately, too, we will continue to see the story on repeat. And as Indigenous people, as First Nation people, as Anishinaabe people, we have to be strong together. The more, and one of the things too is the more oppressed we are, the more colonial these systems are, the more racism they bring on. As First Nations, as Anishinaabe, we have to stand together. We become stronger.
Sol, I want to thank you, Miigwech, for those very strong words.
Thank you.
To keep up to date, you have to subscribe. You have to hit that like button and hit the notification to stay in touch.